In the studio is the Conservative MP Philip Lee, who sits on the Commons Energy and Climate Change Selects Committee. And joining us from Cambridge is the MP Julian Huppert from the Liberal Democrats. Julian Huppert, John Hayes, Energy Minister, says, you know, the country's peppered with wind turbines. You know, you've lost the battle already, haven't you?
Well, John Hayes has made some rather intriguing comments. I think the real point is actually that Ed Davey, who is of course his boss, has made it clear that the government's commitment is clear. We will make sure, as the Liberal Democrats, that the government commitment to provide 30% of UK electricity from renewable sources by 2020 continues. That's what the Conservatives said they agreed with, and I'm sure that David Cameron will be able to make sure that John Hayes sticks to government policy.
But let's just be quite clear here. Basically, John Hayes, Liberal Democrat, disagrees. Ed Davey disagrees with John Hayes. There's going to be no more onshore wind turbines. There's going to be meant to be another 4,000 turbines. They're not going to happen.
Well, the commitment that is shared, and we will make sure the Conservatives stick to it, is to have that 30% renewable component by 2020. There are a number of different ways that one could have it. As your graphic showed earlier, though, onshore wind is by some way the cheapest of those. It would seem very odd at this time for John Hayes to be arguing strongly for us to spend more money than is necessary. We do have to spend money on renewables. It'll actually save us a lot because it'll mean we won't have to pay as much on gas bills and so forth.
But
onshore wind has a great place.
It's quite obvious that there is a deep division in the coalition of this. The Financial Times Online is reporting tonight they've had to delay a meeting of the Quad because they can't even agree a policy a week before the energy bill is published. You know, maybe you're just going to have to give way and say, you know, that onshore energy, onshore renewable energy needs to be ramped up again.
I think what matters here is actually what works. Coalition politics will play out as it will do. I'm more interested in the long-term energy future of my country, and if you look at it, onshore wind and particularly offshore wind isn't a way of guaranteeing energy security in the future. Now, we have obligations. Julian is right. We have obligations with Europe. We have legislation in place with regards to the proportion of renewables in the energy mix, which...
But you don't want them to be wind turbines. You don't want onshore energy to be delivered by wind turbines, do you?
The difficulty is that local communities which have these wind farms don't want them. Now, I think they would be more likely to want them if the figures added up. I'm a scientist, Julian's a scientist. The physics of wind power doesn't add up when compared...
And what you mean that the science is underpinning George Osborne's antipathy to it?
I think the economics is underpinning George Osborne's antipathy towards it, if he is displaying that, because ultimately we have a challenge with regards to energy in the near future, and we have to solve it, and in the most cost-effective way.
So, essentially, George Osborne and Danny Alexander are entirely divided over this a week before the energy bill is published, Julian Huppert. What are the electorate to make of this?
Well, I think what the electorate should make of this is that we at least are trying very hard to stick to our commitments. And I do hope the Conservatives will stick to the things which they said. We'll make sure that this is the greenest government ever, whatever happens. But I was just surprised by Philip's comment earlier. I normally have a huge amount of respect for him about the physics of wind not stacking up. Countries all around the world are looking at wind power for the excellent reason that it is cheap. We've been able to reduce the subsidy to it because it is affordable and because it does work well. I think the real tragedy is we didn't do more wind power 20 years ago when some of the early schemes up in the Shetlands were started. We could have been exporting our technology all around the world, making more money. We do that with a number of green technologies. It's a huge business growth for the UK. We shouldn't walk away from it.
But do you think that what will govern this in the end, very sadly, one way or the other, will be politics and not the scientific evidence?
Sadly, for my taste as a former scientist, far too often scientific evidence isn't taken account of. But the scientific evidence is fairly clear. Professor David Mackay, who's now the government's chief scientific advisor in the Department for Energy and Climate Change, wrote an excellent book, Sustainable Energy Without the Hot Air, which goes through the science of this and how it all adds up. There are lots of ways of providing enough energy for this country, but if you want to do it without onshore wind, it's going to cost more.
Thank you both very much indeed.